The first time America met the Brown family in 2010, it felt like reality TV had unearthed a taboo treasure. A charming man with a mop of curls and a megawatt grin, Kody Brown appeared on screen with not one, not two, four wives and an 18-child brood, all living under one roof in suburban Utah. They laughed, they prayed, they made casseroles, and they did it all in a spirit of love and plural devotion. TLC's Sister Wives promised to lift the veil on modern polygamy, exposing a misunderstood lifestyle full of faith and family, far from the sinister compounds and forced marriages many associated with the practice. Yeah, totally different. But behind the smiling confessionals and color-coded chore charts was a story a lot more complicated than any season finale could contain. As the cameras rolled across the years, secrets emerged, tensions simmered, loyalties fractured. One wife was caught in a catfishing scandal. Another quietly planned her exit. The charismatic patriarch, who once boasted of heavenly callings, began to unravel on national television. And by 2023, the dream of harmonious plural marriage had collapsed into a tangle of heartbreak, custody disputes, and bitter separations. Yet, the Browns are more than just tabloid fodder. They're avatars of a deeper American story, one rooted in the rocky theology of early Mormonism, the controversial legacy of polygamy, and the modern reinvention of faith under scrutiny. Their journey mirrors the long arc of a religion that once sanctioned plural marriages as divine law, then excommunicated its practitioners, and now watches from the sidelines as fringe groups continue to carry on this tradition. This is not just a story of a family. It's the story of a culture, a church, and a country reckoning with the limits of religious freedom, the ethics of consent, and the true meaning of marriage. And today we are jumping right into it, so sit back, relax, and take a deep breath. It's time to let the fresh air in. Hello, everyone. Welcome back, or welcome if you're new. My name is Erin, and I am fascinated by all things cult, true crime, and unique spiritual practices. Whether you're brand new or you've been here since the beginning, I am so grateful and glad that you're here. And I never, ever do this, but I'm trying something new. I've been on a bit of a self-discovery journey this year, and my best friend for my birthday took me to one of those color specialists who determine if you're like a winter, an autumn, a spring, a fall, whatever. And I've lived my entire life thinking I was an autumn. Turns out I'm a spring. And also, bonus, this bright ass red is one of my best colors. So all I need from you guys is to just tell me how good I look, because I feel like I am it's like I'm wearing a highlighter, if that makes sense. I'm not used to wearing such bright colors. And the lady was even like, well, now you're going to just stand out in the crowd. And I'm like, that is not the goal. The goal is to disappear into the background and only draw attention to myself on the platform of my choosing, like YouTube. So just quickly, also the lips are supposed to be bright too. So we're changing the makeup and the shirts and all the things. So go ahead, just tell me how good I look. Please. I just bought so many shirts that are colors I've never worn in my life, and I'm getting concerned. Anyways, enough about me and my insecurities. I want to share with you our teacher of the day. The entire month of July, I'm sponsoring a different teacher in each video to help them fill their classroom with teaching materials, because I think we all know how difficult being a teacher can be, and they all have to pay for their own schooling supplies. So this is hopefully a great way to give back. Absolutely not required, but if you feel inclined and you have the means, please consider donating to today's teacher. And today, this teacher is Angela. Angela is an early childhood teacher in a predominantly immigrant school in South Florida. She's been a teacher for over 20 years. She says, "I've been married to my high school sweetheart for 33 years. I love that. That's so cute. Together, we adopted and raised 6 children from foster care. That's incredible. Because I do not teach at a K-12 school, I do not get a stipend or funding from any state or government education system. My classroom is funded completely by me. My students' needs change every year, and so do the needs of my classroom. Teaching for me isn't a job. It's a calling. Aw. I've been offered jobs making way more money, but I am right where I am supposed to be. Thank you for your consideration, Miss Angela. Have a great day." Oh, that was so sweet. Yes, so that Amazon wish list is going to be pinned in that first comment down below, so you guys will see it right away. It should pop up even before the description, so you shouldn't even have to scroll down. All right, well, thank you, Angela, so much for writing in, and I hope you get everything on your wish list. And without further ado, let's talk about the gift that seems to keep on giving, and that is Mormonism. It seems that people are just so fascinated with Mormonism lately. And I mean, not even just lately, but just over the last few years. I feel like TLC, the learning channel, should actually be called Come Watch Mormons Do Their Life. And since Mormonism is considered by cult experts to be the world's largest cult, I thought, you know what, we should just continue breaking this down, especially if it's in the mainstream, because Mormonism has kind of driven a lot of our trends that younger women in particular are seeing. It's kind of fueled the trad wife trend, which, if you don't know what a trad wife is, it's someone who chooses to live a traditional women's role in the household, right? Or what's used to be considered traditional role. So the mother doesn't work, the mother is a mother and cooks and cleans for her family and rears children and all of that. And so instead of saying, oh yeah, women can be trad wives, there's this movement that is kind of trying to make women feel guilty if that's something that they don't want. Like for me, for example, absolutely not. I have a job. I'm very independent. I do not want children. I don't know if anyone of you guys feel the same way, but I also think that every human being is entitled to live the exact life that they desire to live, as long as they are not harming themselves or others. And so yeah, if you want to be a trad wife, go be a trad wife, but it is not a requirement for any cis woman to have value in her life because she's a trad wife. Now, this is a rant I could go into for way too long. So instead, we are going to just jump into... I hate when videos I watch say, let's jump into the video. And you're like, you've literally been talking not about the video for 7 minutes long. You could have just gotten to the video 5 minutes ago. So finally, after much yapping, we are into the video. So let's jump into the world of polygamy. Now, the practice of plural marriage, one man having multiple wives, and yes, it's typically a man having multiple wives. The wives don't get multiple husbands in this scenario. This whole concept emerged in the early history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or LDS. Church founder Joseph Smith introduced polygamy in the 1840s as a religious principle, teaching that it was divinely sanctioned. The best available evidence suggests that Smith took his first additional wife around 1841 and eventually married more than 50 women in total. Now, at first, these plural marriages were kept secret, as rumors of polygamy started to fuel public hostility towards the Mormons in Illinois. In 1852, several years after Smith's death, church leaders publicly acknowledged that plural marriage, as they call it, was a tenet of the faith, declaring it a central LDS belief. And I wonder why they did that. Oh, could it possibly be that they didn't want anyone thinking that their founder and leader was just a creep and cause people to leave their religion? That's what I suspect. But this doctrine, this polygamy doctrine, often called celestial marriage, held that such unions would continue in the afterlife. So if you are married in the Mormon temple, in the Mormon church, you are connected to that person forever, for eternity. You are sealed to them. And importantly, like I said, the practice was one-sided. Only men could have multiple spouses, while women could only have just one. Even if their husband passed away, there have been women who are concerned and afraid to ever marry again because they don't think they will be sealed to anyone other than their first husband in the afterlife. And additionally, if they get divorced, that means they wouldn't be sealed to their future second or third husband. They would only be sealed to their first husband unless they had some kind of religious unsealing ceremony. That's to the best of my understanding. Please let me know if you are a Mormon or ex-Mormon, if you know more than me, and you can provide some insight. Now, early LDS leaders taught that only select men deemed especially righteous or economically capable were permitted to take plural wives. And even then, the first wife's consent was required. Well, that's something new, isn't it, when it comes to the cultosphere? Now, due to these restrictions, a relatively small minority of Mormon men, an estimated 5 to 15%, were polygamists, though plural marriage loomed large in the church's identity and theology. A 19th century stereoscopic photograph titled A Mormon Saint and Wives, circa 1878, shows a Utah polygamist with his 4 wives, illustrating the early practice of plural marriage among Latter-day Saints. In such families, co-wives were often known as sister wives, reflecting a bond of shared marriage and sisterhood. Mormon plural marriage was strictly patriarchal. LDS women could not take multiple husbands, and only a minority of men were allowed to have plural wives. Church teachings held that plural marriage was commanded by God as part of a new and everlasting covenant, and many early Mormon women and men entered these unions believing it would ensure their exaltation in heaven. And in some possibly more fringe groups of this religion, you would attain a higher status or place in heaven if you had more wives. Sounds like women are just the most valuable thing, not to call women a thing, in a lot of these religions. Maybe women should just be valued more. Now, as the LDS Church grew, the practice of polygamy brought it into severe conflict with the broader American society and the government. Throughout the late 19th century, the U.S. Congress passed a series of anti-bigamy laws, such as the Morrill Anti-Bigamy Act of 1862 and the Edmunds-Tucker Act of 1887. Now, these acts criminalized plural marriage and stripped polygamous Mormons of civil rights. Federal authorities seized church property and jailed polygamous husbands to pressure the faith to try to abandon the practice. Facing quote, imminent destruction of their temples and communities, LDS church leaders reluctantly capitulated. On September 25, 1890, church president Wilford Woodruff issued the famed Mormon Manifesto, formally advising all Latter-day Saints to obey the law of the land and cease contracting any new plural marriages. In this manifesto, which was later incorporated into the LDS scriptures, Woodruff declared, Quote, "We are not teaching polygamy or plural marriage, nor permitting any person to enter into its practice," unquote. And he instructed church members to uphold anti-polygamy laws. This 1890 pronouncement marked the LDS Church's official renunciation of polygamy, though it was met with anguish by many devoted believers who had seen plural marriage as a sacred principle. Even after 1890, some polygamy quietly continued for a time. A handful of high-ranking leaders sanctioned new plural marriages in secret, and certain Mormon families fled to remote areas such as Mexico and Canada to try to continue living in polygamy away from the U.S. law. In 1904, the LDS Church issued a second manifesto, underscoring that any member practicing polygamy would be excommunicated, and the church began to actively discipline offenders. By the early 20th century, the mainstream LDS Church had firmly disavowed plural marriage as a present practice, even as it remained part of early church history and theology. And to this day, the LDS Church excommunicates any members found practicing polygamy, and church spokesmen regularly emphasize that modern polygamist groups have no affiliation with the church. Notably, monogamy became not only a church rule, but a condition of statehood for Utah. When Utah joined the Union in 1896, its state constitution explicitly banned polygamous marriages that would be forever prohibited. This was a legal ban that still remains on the books. Now, in the view of most Latter-day Saints in the 20th and 21st centuries, plural marriage was a controversial but closed chapter of their past, a practice their forebears gave up in order to ensure the survival and progress of their church in broader society. The end of sanctioned polygamy within the LDS Church did not, however, mean the end of polygamy among all Mormons. A subset as believers, later known as Mormon fundamentalists, refused to accept the 1890 Manifesto as a divine revelation and continued to see plural marriage as an essential religious principle. Yeah, it's very essential. These old men just have to have young, beautiful brides who bear their children so that they can all creepily stand in photos and obey their leader, Warren Jeffs. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I did a deep dive. I will try to remember to link it, but I will definitely put it in the description down below. All about FLDS, the fundamentalist LDS, basically. They do forced marriages. They have child brides. It's utterly disgusting. And I do want to take this moment to just express, people appreciate different types of relationships. I am very monogamous, but I've known people who have had very successful poly relationships. This is not a criticism of that lifestyle, but rather connecting it to some kind of spiritual or holier than thou or better than mentality. And it's inherently misogynistic if only the men are allowed to have all of the women. And it's interesting too because we kind of see that feed into society. I've actually spoken to a male friend before who was like, well, I would really like to have 2 girlfriends, but they couldn't have any other boyfriends. And I'm like, okay, well, what's the point of that? Although I will say sometimes I'm like, it would be cool to have a wife because wives do so much stuff. My husband has me, and I would like a wife to help with the house and everything because I don't even have kids and it's hard. Me and my friends sometimes joke I'd love to have a wife. I'd love to have a second me in the house. Anyways. In the decades after the manifesto, those dissenters or members who kind of filtered into fringe groups like the FLDS, they started devoting themselves to these fringe communities in an effort to preserve what they called the principle, which is plural marriage. Now, many of the early fundamentalists were actually excommunicated from the LDS Church for defying the ban. But they would gather in remote settlements in Utah, Arizona, and Mexico, and they were determined to continue the polygamous lifestyle of the early church. By the 1930s, loosely organized fundamentalist networks had given rise to more defined groups with their own leaders or prophets. One early fundamentalist enclave took root at Short Creek on the Utah-Arizona border, which would eventually give rise to, ding ding ding, you guessed it, the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or FLDS. Others formed the Apostolic United Brethren, or AUB, and there were a number of other independent clans. Now, all these groups share a belief that the LDS Church fell into apostasy by abandoning plural marriage, and they consider themselves the keepers of original Mormon truths. Okay, that's a really weird way to say, I'm a creep and I only see women as objects I get to collect. Now, today, fundamentalist Mormons across various sects are estimated to a number of over 30,000 in the western United States. They continue to practice polygamy in defiance of civil law, believing it will bring glorification in heaven and fulfill God's ancient commandments. Now, over time, several distinct polygamist sects emerged, each with its own leadership and rules. The FLDS, once led by Warren Jeffs, became the most infamous. It was an insular community that did arrange marriages between young girls and old men, often expelling young quote-unquote surplus boys to reduce competition for wives, creating the so-called lost boys phenomenon. The FLDS dominated the twin towns of Hilldale, Utah, and Colorado City, Arizona, until authorities began prosecuting its leaders. And Warren Jeffs is now serving a life prison sentence for child SA related to underage marriages he conducted. Another prominent group, the AUB, was formed under leader Rulon C. Allred in the mid-20th century. The AUB is often described as a more moderate or liberal, LOL, branch of the fundamentalist movement. Its members tend to live more openly in mainstream society, and the group publicly renounces underage marriages or law-breaking, unless you're marrying like 8 women. Unlike the FLDS, though, the AUB does not demand a closed communal life. Many AUB families live in normal suburbs, they send children to public schools, and they interact with non-members regularly. Now, this relative openness can be traced back to AUB leaders like Owen Allred, who encouraged integration with society, which is very, very unique for a group like this. Now, fundamentalist groups like the AUB still revere the LDS Church's early prophets and scriptures, but they operate independently and regard the Salt Lake City-based LDS Church as having strayed from God's commandments. But despite their differences, virtually all Mormon fundamentalists share core tenets. They view plural marriage as a commandment from Joseph Smith and Brigham Young that remains in force, and they look to a patriarchal family order as divinely ordained. Fundamentalist men typically take multiple wives in spiritual marriages that are not recognized by the state because, of course, they want to avoid those bigamy charges. And meanwhile, fundamentalist women are raised to accept plural marriage as part of their faith. Within these communities, women who shared a husband commonly addressed each other as sister wives, echoing the 19th century Mormon term for female co-wives. Now, life in fundamentalist polygamist groups has been the subject of much scrutiny and controversy. There have been periodic raids and legal crackdowns, from the 1953 Short Creek raid, which made national headlines, all the way to the 2008 raid on the FLDS Yearning for Zion Ranch in Texas, which uncovered widespread marriage of underage girls. Critics and former members have described many of these sects as cult-like, citing authoritarian male leaders, coerced or teen marriages, and the subjugation of women, and of course, the expulsion of those poor young men. In extreme cases, leaders have claimed prophetic status and demanded absolute obedience. For example, in a recent case in Arizona, fundamentalist leader Samuel Bateman, which I did a deep dive on also, I will try to link it here, but it will be down in the description. He basically self-proclaimed that he was the next Warren Jeffs, essentially. Well, he was arrested just last year in 2024 and sentenced to 50 years in prison for absolutely horrific abuses. He had claimed over 20 spiritual wives, including underage girls as young as 9, and even coerced them into intimate acts and even plotted to kidnap children who had been placed in protective custody once, the feds got wind of what he was doing. Federal investigators found that Bateman had enforced cult-like control over his flock, forcing followers to publicly confess indiscretions, and he would submit them to punishments that included SA. Now, at the same time, not all post-manifesto polygamous families fit the most extreme mold. Many fundamentalist plural families, especially in groups like the AUB or independent clans, they insist that their lifestyle consists of consenting adult relationships, and they distance themselves from abuses. They often point out that early Mormon polygamy included distinguished members of society and was even linked to women's empowerment in some cases. I know, I was like, can't be true. Women empowerment? Really? You get to have a bunch of wives, but I can't find a boyfriend or a husband on the side? Well, Utah's polygamous wives were among the first to campaign for women's suffrage in the late 19th century, which I did not know until researching for this video. But nevertheless, even fundamentalist polygamists who abide by basic civil laws have faced legal jeopardy simply for cohabitating with multiple wives. In Utah, where the Mormon heartland lies, polygamy remained a felony crime for over a century after the manifesto, a legacy of the painful past conflict between the LDS Church and the U.S. government. Only very recently has that begun to change. In 2020, the Utah State Legislature passed a bill decriminalizing polygamy among consenting adults and reduced it from a felony to a minor infraction on par with a traffic ticket. The reform, which was signed into law, reflected a recognition that treating plural families as felons often drove them to, quote, the fringes of society and created a culture of fear, unquote, and that would allow greater abuses and it would prevent victims from actually seeking help. Now, under the new Utah law, adults in plural relationships will generally not be prosecuted unless there are other crimes involved, such as child abuse, fraud, or violence. However, bigamy remains illegal. So you can't carry multiple marriage licenses, but you can live with multiple people who you call your wives. Now, this decriminalization was supported by some plural marriage families, and even former members of those abusive sects who argued that it could encourage integration and the reporting of potential crimes. People couldn't marry off children to 80-year-old men. Instead of trying to go get involved in a commune where you could live out your polygamous fantasy and potentially marry your children to old 80-year-old men without their consent, it would drive you to just kind of hide in plain sight and practice your polygamy publicly almost. And I guess I understand the point of view of if we are not doing these things that are kind of hidden from society within these communes, within these cults, maybe it won't escalate to children being essentially sold off into a marriage and young men being excommunicated because they're more attractive and young, and the young women probably would want to marry one of them instead of an older man. So I get that logic. However, it was strongly opposed by anti-polygamy advocates like the Sound Choices Coalition, who insist that polygamy is inherently harmful. Sound Choices warned that lawmakers were recklessly trying to change history without understanding the harms to men and women that are inherent in this social system. Now, the debate still remains heated, illustrating that plural marriage, although largely driven underground, is still very much a live issue in Utah and the neighboring areas. Which is so interesting because if you saw my recent video on the secret lives of Mormon wives, it goes into like the women's role within the church. One of the biggest scandals that catapulted Mom Talk into fame was the leader of it becoming a swinger. So it just feels like in the Mormon community, polygamy is it's fringe, but it makes people really curious, I think. The fact that it was considered to be doctrine and then that changed, I feel like it would invoke a lot of curiosity in you. It's kind of like when you tell a kid not to touch a hot thing and they're like, why? I need to touch the hot thing. It feels like that type of energy to me. And what's interesting is if the husbands in Mom Talk had done that, I bet nobody would have cared. But because the women aren't allowed to experience any pleasure and especially not allowed to be with multiple partners, it turned into an absolute, like, huge national sensationalist scandal. And then became a reality show. So there's that. Now, let's talk about the TLC show Sister Wives. In 2010, the rarely seen world of modern polygamy was thrust into the spotlight of American pop culture with the debut of TLC's reality show Sister Wives. The show follows the lives of the Brown family. Kody Brown and his 4 wives, Mary, Janelle, Christine, and Robin, and their combined 18 children as they navigate the marriages of a plural marriage in the 21st century. Now, at the start of the show, the Browns were all living together in one home in Lehi, Utah, openly defying Utah's anti-polygamy law by publicly acknowledging their plural marriage. They described themselves as fundamentalist Mormons, but not members of the LDS Church, and explained that their motivation in doing the show was to educate the public and dispel prejudices about polygamous families. Kody Brown contended that he was not breaking bigamy laws because he was only legally married to one wife, Mary, and that his unions with the other wives were spiritual marriages, not recognized by the state. Mormons love those loopholes, don't they? He and his wives hoped that by coming out on television, they could put a human face on plural marriage and show that their family was based on love and mutual consent, not coercion or abuse. Now, at the start of the series, the Brown family belonged to the AUB, that Mormon fundamentalist church that let people kind of integrate into society. The Browns said they just wanted to normalize their sister-wife family in the eyes of the public. And from the beginning, sister wives attracted widespread attention, both because people were curious, and also people love judging other people on television. Viewers got an intimate look at how the Brown household functioned. Each wife had her own bedroom or area within the home, and Kody would rotate between them on different nights. I would not like that. My own bedroom? Absolutely. Knowing what day my husband was going to come spend time with me and that he had just hopped from a different wife the night before, not for me. The wives did demonstrate both a loving camaraderie, but also moments of jealousy or tension. The early seasons documented everyday family events like vacations, birthdays, the birth of new babies, as well as big changes, most notably the addition of Kody's 4th wife, Robin, shortly before the show began, which required some adjusting to the family dynamic. Now, the Browns family's religious background is important to trying to understand their lifestyle. Now, in the series, the Browns emphasize that their marriages are between consenting adults. All 4 wives chose polygamy of their own free will, often citing personal faith. For example, Christine once said that she, quote, wanted the family, not just the man, unquote, and expressed how she had grown up wanting to live in a big plural family. The Browns also plainly reject underage marriage and any form of forced marriage, trying to distance themselves from the abuses associated with Warren Jeffs and the FLDS. In one episode, they even traveled to visit another plural family to discuss advocacy against the criminalization of polygamy. They were very intent to be model law-abiding polygamists, apart from the fact of their law-breaking cohabitation at the time. But nevertheless, mere days after Sister Wives first aired, Utah authorities took notice. On September 27th, the day after the series premiere, police in Lehi, Utah announced that they had opened an investigation of the Browns for bigamy. Utah's law at the time defined not just plural marriage licenses, but also cohabitating with multiple spouses as criminal bigamy. So the Browns' open admission of their living arrangements put them in legal peril. Fearing prosecution, the family made a dramatic decision in early 2001. They all got divorced. Nope, I'm kidding. They fled Utah and moved to Las Vegas, Nevada, where a plural cohabitation was not actively prosecuted. Subsequent episodes of the show depicted the family resettling in Nevada, initially all 4 wives sharing adjacent rental homes, and later building 4 separate houses on a shared cul-de-sac. And it's weird, I'm thinking of this group that it was literally like a cult within a cul-de-sac, but it was more of like a Satanist cult. I'll try to remember to link the video here and down in the description. But it's a very disturbing, creepy story. That just came to mind. Got a little sidetracked there. Now, by moving into a new state, the Browns effectively put the Lehi investigation on hold. And indeed, Utah authorities ultimately declined to charge them, citing a general policy of not pursuing polygamists unless other crimes like underage marriage or fraud were involved. Now, with the legal threat temporarily at bay, the Browns turned their attention to a larger battle, challenging the constitutionality of Utah's anti-polygamy law. In 2011, Kody, Mary, Janelle, Christine, and Robin Brown all filed a federal lawsuit against Utah's county attorney seeking to overturn the state's ban on plural cohabitation. In December 2013, a U.S. judge ruled in the Browns' favor, striking down the portion of Utah's law that criminalized cohabitation with multiple partners, while leaving intact the ban on multiple active marriage licenses. And this was a landmark decision, effectively decriminalizing the living arrangements of polygamous families in Utah. And the Browns celebrated the ruling as a victory for their civil rights and validation of their lifestyle. However, the legal win was short-lived because in 2016, the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals vacated the decision on procedural grounds, saying that the case was moot because the Browns had moved out of Utah and prosecutors had indicated that they wouldn't charge them anyway. The appeals court found that the Browns no longer faced a credible threat of prosecution, and thus they lacked standing to sue. The U.S. Supreme Court later declined to hear the case, leaving Utah's polygamy statute technically in place, though, as noted, Utah lawmakers soon reformed the law via legislation in 2020. So it's just flip-flop, flip-flop, flip-flop. Now, while the Browns did not achieve a definitive court precedent, their legal fight brought unprecedented attention to the polygamy issue. It also coincided with shifts in public attitude, perhaps influenced in part by the show itself presenting a sympathetic portrait of a plural family. Now, the Browns' family way of life both reflects and diverges from various Mormon traditions. In terms of belief, the Browns have repeatedly affirmed that they are fundamentalist Mormons. They accept the Book of Mormon and other LDS scriptures, and they view plural marriage as a commandment from God. So, a requirement to reach the highest levels of heaven. Now, in this, they align with other Mormon fundamentalists and differ sharply from the mainstream LDS Church, which, again, renounced that doctrine. For fundamentalists like the Browns, Joseph Smith's 1843 revelation on celestial marriage, now Doctrine and Covenants 132, is still in force, whereas for mainstream Latter-day Saints today, that section of scripture is largely historical or applicable only in the afterlife. But again, only for the men. The LDS Church teaches its members that plural marriage is not to be practiced on earth today, and anyone doing it is apostate. In one public statement, an LDS spokesman plainly said, "If any of our members are found practicing polygamy, they are excommunicated," and emphasized that groups like those featured on Sister Wives have no affiliation with the church. Thus, there is a stark belief divide. To the Browns, living plural marriage is a righteous act of faith, while to mainstream Mormons, it is a mortal sin. Culturally and socially, the Browns also straddle a line between mainstream society and insular fundamentalism. In contrast to some compound-style polygamists, the Browns are relatively modern and integrated. They dress in contemporary clothing, no prairie dresses or pioneer outfits, and they live in suburban neighborhoods. The wives have held jobs, started businesses, and even attended college classes in later seasons. The Brown children attend public schools, play sports, and use social media. So this is in keeping with the AUB's approach of not isolating from the world. Now on the show, we see the Browns' teens going to regular high school and later college, a far cry from the FLDS who typically pull children out of school by 8th grade. The Browns celebrate Christmas and birthdays much like any American family. And they're generally monogamous in their relations aside from Kody's plural marriage. However, the wives still do not date or have other partners, nor could they under their religious beliefs. One interesting aspect is that the Browns prefer the term Mormon for themselves, even though the LDS Church would object to that usage. Kody and his wives often call the LDS Church the mainstream or the big church and refer to themselves as fundamentalist Mormons. And by this, they mean that they are part of the broader LDS religious tradition, just not members of the Utah-based church. I mean, the mental gymnastics you have to do. We're fundamentalists, but we're also, but no, we're Mormon, but we're not mainstream Mormon. We're just adjacent, but we're not the creepy ones that live in a cult. We're not regular Mormons, we're cool Mormons. Now this highlights a very big cultural tussle. The LDS Church in recent years has tried to distance the term Mormon from polygamists, but the fundamentalists insist that they are the true heirs of the original Mormon faith. In one episode, the Browns join with other polygamous families at an event to distinguish their form of Mormonism from the criminal abuses of Warren Jeffs. They have at times expressed respect for the LDS Church. Christine's own mother eventually rejoined the LDS Church after years in polygamy, yet they firmly rejected the LDS's assertion that God revoked the commandment of plural marriage. But compared to other fundamentalist groups, the Browns' lifestyle is quite progressive. For example, education of girls is encouraged. 5 of the Brown daughters have attended college so far, and another daughter, Maddie, even spoke out about the importance of education for polygamous community kids. Choice in marriage is another area. In the Brown family, children are raised with the idea that they can choose whether to live plural marriage or not. In fact, several of the adult Brown children have chosen monogamous marriages or have openly said that polygamy is not for them, without any evident fallout. So this again contrasts with closed sects where children are expected to continue the lifestyle and often have arranged marriages. Some of the Brown kids have even left their parents' fundamentalist church entirely. Most notably, in recent years, most of the Brown family ceased activity in the AUB, and they no longer consider themselves part of that organized church. They've not elaborated much on why, but observers speculate that as the family evolved and some relationships frayed, their ties to the AUB leadership started to lapse. By 2023, the Browns were essentially independent, with no new plural marriages being formed and some wives returning to monogamy. However, in other respects, the Browns adhere to traditional patriarchal structures common to fundamentalists. Kody Brown has been the indisputed head of the household. All major decisions regarding moving or finances are ostensibly made with his agreement, though often in counsel with the wives. The wives hold their husband in great esteem as the priesthood holder of the family. There's also a clear religious component to their marriage. They were all sealed in their church's temple or by authority of their priesthood, meaning that they consider their unions eternal. Polygamy for them is not just a lifestyle choice, but literally a commandment that they believe will secure their exaltation as a family unit in the afterlife. Now, this shared faith has often been cited by the wives as a source of strength and unity. For instance, the women have spoken about praying together or relying on their belief that God wants their family to succeed. On Sister Wives, we see scenes of them attending church services, not LDS services, but those of their own group, and teaching their kids Mormon fundamentalist beliefs like observing the word of wisdom, which means no alcohol, coffee, or tobacco. And the Browns do follow these traditional LDS health codes. codes. So in these ways, the Brown household resembles a conservative religious family, albeit with multiple moms. From its inception, Sister Wives has courted controversy by the very fact that it mainstreamed a felonious practice. The idea of normalizing polygamy on TV upset various groups, including many mainstream Mormons who worry the show blurs the line between their church and the fundamentalists, and anti-polygamy activists who fear that highlighting a happy, consenting plural family could downplay very real issues that are inherent in polygamy. And indeed, one of the primary criticisms of the show is that it paints an overly rosy picture of plural marriage. Detractors point out that Sister Wives is a reality TV production and likely emphasizes drama, but also positive aspects to try to keep audiences engaged. They argue that for most women, polygamy is rife with jealousy, inequality, and emotional pain, problems that can't be fully erased by smiling for the cameras. Over the years, viewers themselves have witnessed many difficulties within the Brown family that arguably illustrate these inherent challenges. One recurring issue is jealousy and emotional neglect. While the Brown wives often speak of loving each other as sisters, they also candidly discuss how hard it is to share a husband. Each wife has gone through periods of feeling neglected or less loved. For example, first wife Mary struggled with loneliness after she legally divorced Kody in 2014 so that he could legally marry Robin and adopt Robin's children. Though Mary agreed to that arrangement, it led her to feeling unmoored in the family. This emotional distance played a role in the infamous catfishing scandal that rocked the family in 2015. Mary formed an online relationship, thinking she'd met a new male friend who understood her, but it turned out that she was being deceived by a woman posing as a man. When this catfishing scheme was exposed, it caused a public sensation. Private voicemails and love notes from Mary were leaked, embarrassing the family and straining Mary's already fraying marriage. Kody was deeply hurt and angry, viewing Mary's online dalliance as a marital betrayal. He later said that from the catfishing experience, Mary and I saw our marriage just dissolve. Mary, for her part, felt that her emotional needs had long been unmet, and the catfish, who pretended to be a caring businessman named Sam, had exploited her vulnerability. The show documented tearful conversations as the other wives tried to support Mary, but also felt upset that her actions risked the family's public image. Critics pointed to this saga as evidence that polygamy can leave women emotionally unsatisfied. Mary's loneliness, they argue, was a product of living in a family where her husband's time and affection was always divided. Another controversy has been favoritism and power dynamics within the Brown marriage. As the series progressed, many fans and even family members observed that Kody seemed to gravitate toward his newest wife, Robin, at the expense of others. Robin, who is the youngest wife, was often perceived as the favorite, the one whose house Kody spent the most time at and whose opinions carried the most weight. And this caused resentment to simmer, especially from Christine and Janelle. During the C-19 pandemic, these tensions boiled over. Kody set strict quarantine rules and primarily stayed with Robin and their kids, leading Janelle and Christine to feel that he was essentially abandoning the rest of the family. Christine openly questioned why Robin was allowed a nanny in her home during quarantine, pointedly asking in frustration, "What does the nanny do?" when Kody was refusing to visit some of his other children due to safety protocols. Moments like this sparked widespread discussion online about unequal treatment among the sister wives. The patriarchal structure of polygamy inherently gives the husband a lot of power to distribute or withhold attention, and in the Browns' case, viewers saw how this can lead to feelings of injustice. By late 2021, Christine had reached a breaking point, and she announced that she was leaving Kody and the polygamous marriage for good. After 25 years as a sister wife, Christine decided that she could no longer remain in a marriage where she felt unloved and unsupported. Now, this was a watershed moment both for the family and for the show. It was the first time one of the wives unequivocally left. And with a situation like this, too, it's concerning because legally, what is Christine entitled to? She wasn't legally married to the man. I suppose you could have what would be considered common law marriage, but what are the legalities of that if he's already married to someone? You're essentially a roommate who had kids with the married man of the household. What is she going to do financially to support herself? All she can do is really get child support, but she's not entitled to any other financial support, which just puts her in a really vulnerable situation. Now, Kody Brown has also made his own strange statements about polygamy. In recent episodes, his plural marriages have unraveled, and Kody has voiced doubts about the practice. In a tell-all moment from season 18, Kody admitted that polygamy kills emotional intimacy. It makes everyone defensive. He reflected that he craved a truly intimate, vulnerable, one-on-one relationship, and, quote, "You're not going to get that in polygamy," unquote. Well, who'd have thought if you had multiple wives, it would be difficult to have intimate one-on-one relationships? Now, this frank confession from the patriarch of sister wives was kind of startling. It essentially confirmed what critics have long suspected, that maintaining multiple marriages is inherently detrimental to marital intimacy. Kody even said he wouldn't choose polygamy again if he could go back in time. So these comments have fueled a lot of debates on whether the Brown family's experiment failed and if polygamy itself was to blame. Detractors argue that despite the Browns' best efforts to show plural marriage in a positive light, the end result was 3 of 4 wives leaving and the family fragmenting, which they see as validation of their warnings about the system's unsustainability. Now, beyond the personal dynamics, Sister Wives has been critiqued for cult-like aspects or glossing over them. While the Browns themselves do not exhibit extreme culty behavior, they don't isolate their kids or claim any prophetic authority, the show has been accused of sanitizing the broader fundamentalist subculture. For instance, the series rarely delves into the darker history of fundamentalist Mormonism. Viewers won't learn from sister wives about leaders like Warren Jeffs or the aforementioned abuses in other groups. And this omission would give the false impression that all is well in the polygamist world, aside from, a little jealousy. The Browns do occasionally reference other groups where bad things happen, but they keep the conversation light. Critics from inside the ex-polygamist community, like activist Kristen Decker, herself a former sister wife and now an outspoken opponent of polygamy, have argued that even in happy families like the Browns, there are underlying issues of female subordination and religious pressure that the show just skirts. They point out that all the Brown wives were essentially groomed from birth to accept polygamy. Christine, for example, is Mormon royalty. She was taught that becoming a third wife was a noble ambition. They question how free the choice really was, given that it's tied to salvation in this belief system. And legal analysts have also weighed in. Some worry that sister wives and similar media have swayed public sentiment to be more permissive of polygamy without recognizing potential harms like power imbalances and economic strain. In polygamous families, typically one man must provide for many children and wives, so if he lacks means, it can lead to poverty or reliance on public assistance, which is a sensitive topic often brought up regarding fundamentalist communities. The Brown family's finances have indeed been a point of speculation. With so many mouths to feed, they admitted early on to sometimes having to scramble to make ends meet. Another power imbalance often cited is that women in polygamy have no equal right to multiple spouses, meaning that the arrangement is inherently unequal. Even if the women consent, some scholars argue that polygamy institutionalizes gender inequality. The Browns have defended their faith by saying the sister wives do have a say and are not doormats throughout the show, but we see them voicing their opinions and occasionally even defying Kody. But honestly, is that enough? Because nonetheless, the patriarchal nature remains. I mean, even on the show, Kody has at times reminded his wives and the audience that he is the head of the household as ordained by God in their view. Now, it's important to note that despite all the controversies, Sister Wives also garnered some empathy for plural families. The Browns' openness helped many viewers see them as ordinary people with joys and struggles, not just caricatures. Over the years, public opinion in Utah and the West has shifted somewhat. Calls to outright prosecute consenting adult polygamists have lessened, with more focus on targeting abuse. In 2023, a Gallup poll even found increased support for legal recognition of polygamy, though still a small minority view. Some observers dub this the sister wife effect. While polygamy remains far from socially acceptable in America, the Brown saga has at least started a conversation about religious freedom, marital structure, and the limits of law in regulating consensual relationships. But Mormon subculture continues to grapple with balancing tradition and reform, secrecy and openness, faith and legality. As recent events show, there are both efforts to integrate polygamists into society through law changes, and there are efforts to crack down on egregious abuses within polygamous sects. The story of Mormon sister wives is still unfolding, intertwined with questions of religious liberty, women's rights, and the ever-evolving definition of family in America. But as the dust settles on what was once America's most visible plural marriage, the Brown family's legacy is left for viewers, critics, and scholars to dissect. Sister Wives began as a bold experiment in transparency, a family stepping into the spotlight to demystify polygamy. It evolved into a case study in religious practice under modern pressure and exposed how even the most well-intentioned plural unions can succumb to human limitations, jealousy, loneliness, inequality, and emotional fatigue. Across the American West, there are still thousands of fundamentalist Mormons who still cling to the principle, living in the shadows of law and legitimacy. Some do so peacefully, but others under the thumb of self-declared prophets and abusive leaders. The line between faith and fanaticism remains as blurred as ever. And meanwhile, the mainstream LDS Church, desperate to distance itself from its polygamous past, continues to excommunicate those who practice what its own founder once preached as eternal truth. So in the end, Sister Wives leaves us with some uncomfortable questions. Can plural marriage ever truly exist without exploitation? And where does religious freedom end and societal protection begin? And what do we owe to women and men raised to believe that sharing a spouse is their spiritual destiny? The show may go on, but the illusion of celestial perfection has shattered. And in its place stands a raw, unfiltered portrait of belief under fire, love under strain, and a family, once mythic, reduced to its most human form. So, what do you think about the concept of sister wives or plural marriages? Are you on board? Have you experienced something like this? I would love to hear someone's firsthand account. So please, if you're comfortable, leave it down in the comments below. For me, very, very monogamous. Yeah. Love my husband. Yeah. It's such a, I think when people think about, I think on the surface, the idea of having multiple partners can be fun and exciting, especially if you're in a long-term relationship. But I think if you zoom out and consider all of the implications of what that would look like, it's got to be so challenging to do. And also, who's got the time? I barely see my husband. Anyways, guys, please let me know your thoughts down below. Make sure to check out Angela's wish list if you have the means, and I will see you in my next video very, very soon. I really appreciate your support. Thank you guys so much. Stay safe, ask questions, and always stay skeptical. See you soon.